Okay, check 1 2, check 1 2, testing, testing. Spell algorithm. I literally spell algorithm every week, and I still don't know how to spell algorithm. Okay, so please hit the like button. It helps fuel the algorithm. There's that word. And comment any questions that you have in the chat. This should be an important and good stream. I said before that I wanted streams to be a little bit more about specific topics again, like they used to be on this channel a bit, and we're going to try and do about 2 commentaries a month instead of 4. And so this is the first of this new model of or renewed model of live streams. And that makes sense because it's about the first principles of the first question, or the first question of first principles, whichever way you want to put it. They're both true to what we're going to be discussing in the stream tonight. It's a very important topic because it is the foundation of all sense making. You cannot actually have coherent process of sense making if you don't start from the absolute foundation of truth that you can start from. So we're going to talk about that tonight because, once I asked myself a question, and it turns out it led to some profound discoveries about reason and logic and first principles and sense making in general. I asked myself, what is the first question? And the amazing amount of information that comes from asking that one question, what is the first question, is incredible. And there's so much beauty and symmetry in that question that just it's a question that grows itself. The answer grows, the questions that are subsequent questions from that question grow. It's amazing, and we're going to get into it. But it is a very important topic, as I said, and it's one that has been completely lost. The answer to this question is one that is increasingly denied, not just ignored, but straight up denied. I cannot tell you in the last 2-3 weeks how many YouTube thumbnails have popped up into my homepage that say consciousness is an illusion and reality is an illusion and the self is an illusion, and it's all kind of denying of things instead of acknowledging of things. And we're going to talk about why also that is not a logical way of approaching, like I said, sense making, the logic of sense making. So here we go. By the way, I did turn on super chats. Feel free. I will try and answer everybody's question in the chat, whether you super chat me or not. But super chats are much appreciated. So first, my voice is a bit dry. Here we go. Okay. So, first principles. First time I ever heard of first principles was from Elon Musk, and it's a very commonly stated term in the physics world, and I've noticed, and unfortunately, I think that it's not actually properly instantiated into people's sense making and thinking process the way that they think that it is. So, and of course, the very first thing that pops up here, what did Elon Musk mean by first principles? And there was this famous clip where he said, most people reason by analogy, but really when you want to solve a problem, what you want to do is solve it by approaching it from first principles. A first principles approach, sometimes called reasoning from first principles, or first principles thinking, is the practice of questioning every assumption you think you know about a given problem, then creating new solutions from scratch. It's one of the best ways to unlock creative solutions to complicated problems. This is a very good definition. So, a first principle is an axiom that cannot be deduced from any other within that system. The classic example is that of Euclid's Elements. Its hundreds of geometric propositions can be deduced from a set of definitions, postulates, and common notions. All three types constitute first principles. Okay, I don't really understand exactly that, but I also do understand why I don't, because I haven't read it. In physics and other sciences, theoretical work is often said to be from first principles, or ab initio. Abinitio. If it starts directly at the level of established science and does not make assumptions such that empirical model or such as empirical model or parameter fitting, first principles thinking consists of deriving things to their fundamental proven axioms in a given arena before reasoning up from there and asking which ones are relevant to the question at hand, then cross-referencing conclusions based on chosen axioms and making sure conclusions do not violate any fundamental laws. Physicists include counterintuitive concepts with reiteration. I don't know what that means exactly. Reiteration is the repetition of a process. Well, obviously, I don't know what they mean by that, though, in that context. So, first principles has become kind of like a gotcha word since Elon Musk said this, because, it makes you sound smart. And it's very harmful to use this term unless you're actually using it properly, because it's like calling something the truth when it's not the truth. You need to call the truth, and that's it, and everything else not the truth. So when you call something some type of process reasoning from first principles, it needs to be extremely precisely accurate in knowing that what you are calling first principles is first principles. Because right now, as this said, this definition that is on Google, starting from already established models and scientific assumptions does not work really with first principles. Now, you can say that you're starting from a certain point and then reasoning from there, and first principles given that assumption, and that's fine. But that is a model, and it's not fundamental. So if you're going to reason about the world fundamentally, there are certain things that you have to take into account and make sure that you do if you're going to reason from truly first principles. So can we even find not just how to reason from first principles, but a first principle? Okay, this is the first question that I was talking about earlier. In order to find a first principle to reason up from using first principles, a first principles approach, you have to ask a question that will give you the first principle, which means you have to ask the first question. And that is what we're going to talk about tonight. There was one thing that's interesting is, and while I was making the thumbnail for this, which is a terrible thumbnail, and I admit that, I know it, I'm going to change it because I'm, with the thumbnails of the commentaries, there's the kind of a set structure that I follow and lets me do it pretty quickly. I'm not saying it's great, but it works. But with the thumbnails for these more one-off, me exploring a topic, I don't yet have an established model of making thumbnails, so they're going to be trash, but I will replace the ones that are terrible. when I think of a better idea. But as I was making the thumbnail, I realized that I wanted to change the title of this stream, and so that's why the thumbnail is different than the title. But it's still about the same thing. And I thought about including the kind of the ultimate answer, okay, in this stream, because there is obviously an extremely famous book and that was turned into a movie called Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy. And Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy is in this story. They go to there's this like city or society, tribe, whatever, this group of people, these beings that construct the ultimate AGI, technological sentience, the ultimate computer, thinking computer. And in order to ask it a question, and in order to get an answer. And so they ask it, what is the answer? And it's, like the answer to what? And it's like, and they say, it says the answer to what? And they say the answer to life, the universe, and everything. Okay. So, and it says, go away and come back and after a period of time, and I will give you the answer. And they leave and they come back, and I would like to show the clip, but it might cause, copyright issues. But they leave and they come back, and then the computer, which is named Deep Thought, gives them the answer, and the answer is 42. And what's funny is 42 is not that far from the ultimate answer, but we'll get into that another day. As crazy as that sounds. But basically, when they're dissatisfied with this answer of 42, they're like, what do you mean 42 is the answer to life, the universe, and everything? Deep Thought says to them, well, you asked a stupid question. You asked a question that cannot be answered. So how am I supposed to give you an answer that makes sense to a question that doesn't make sense? And so what this shows is that, it's highlighting of the importance of asking the right question. And you're not going to get the ultimate answer if you don't ask the ultimate question. And I would say that the ultimate answer is a little bit different than the ultimate question, because the ultimate answer is about why, I think, almost more than it is about, what. And we'll get into that another time, maybe tonight, but maybe not. But I wanted to focus on what is the first question, instead of what is the ultimate question, instead of what is the ultimate answer. Okay, because I actually believe that you can get both of these. Okay, they're very highly linked. In order to get the ultimate answer, you have to already be starting from the premise learned from the ultimate question, which is the first question. It is the foundation of first principles. It's the first question that gives you the first principle of first principles. And that sounds so profound to say, because the idea that there is a first question it just sounds like nonsense. And I get that. I mean, most people don't even ask themselves, is there a first question that can even be asked? They just assume that there isn't. That just, any question is a good question, is what we all were taught in school. And that, questions are just not, there isn't an objective order to questions. There is, it's assumed that questions are purely relativistic to this, and, situation specific, essentially. But that's not true. There are questions and answers that are related to everything and everyone. And these are fundamental questions and fundamental answers. They're not relativistic. They're not situation specific in a subjective circumstance. They are ultimate. They are foundational. They are fundamental. They are the first and last parts of us sense making in our world, and of every part of our world, life, the universe, and everything. So It says here in philosophy and science, a first principle is a basic proposition or assumption that cannot be deduced from any other proposition or assumption. But that means that it's not a first principle. It's the first principle. Okay? Now, if you're importing information from a different system into a new system in order to, sense make in that circumstance, like if you're going to go from, I don't know, chemistry to biology, and you're importing information from chemistry into biology to start sense making in biology, then you have first principles of biology, which is going to be linked to chemistry. And you can go down the list, and physics is going to be, the first principles of chemistry, essentially. But if you're going to zoom out completely or zoom in completely, both simultaneously, then there is an objectivity to questions and answers that is never, ever talked about in any mainstream institutions that I've ever seen, at least. And that makes a lot of sense when you understand the institutions. But I don't hear very many people talk about this in general knowingly, but they do talk about it in quotes that they say. And one of the quotes that people say that's linked to this is, "I think, therefore I am." And that's very close to, closely related to this. But it's not, we're going to go even more fundamental than that. But that's the closest that I've heard in society, in regards to trying to get at, what is, So this is the question that I asked myself. And I'm going to show you that this is the first question. This first question answers itself and with itself, which is amazing. So right here. This is it. The first question, you can see at the top, question 1, is what is the first question? The answer to the first question is itself. The answer to what is the first question is what is the first question, obviously, because you asked it. You understand? It's a self-answering question. Isn't that amazing? And there are mathematical implications to this as well. And this is very, very linked to numbers and growth of information in the universe, because it has to be. It has to be. If you're going to grow information in the universe and you're, the sentient existence, singularity of sentience that is, the initiator of multiplicity, then you have to ask a question in order to generate more information. And in that instance, there's nothing else besides the question that you're asking. So the question answers itself, which is amazing even from a metaphysical analysis, because there's no other information other than the question that you're asking. It can't not answer itself. But also the logic of the question itself, once it's, even after it's been asked and it's been answered, and then there's subsequent questions that have been, built on it, it still follows the same rule. It answers itself. What is the first question? Is the first question that must be asked in order to get to the first principle, and it answers itself with what is the first question. If that makes sense. It's kind of super obvious that it's like, it might be hard to make sense of because it's kind of repetitive, and it's unique, but it's actually super simple. If I asked you, what is the first question? The only answer that you can give me that is accurate is, what is the first question? Obviously. And that's amazing. But when you look at like information generation mechanisms, like self-referential mathematical, sequences like the Fibonacci sequence, they start with like 1, 1, 2, 3. And then all of a sudden, it kicks off and more information is made. So, but the 1 repeats. It doesn't go 1, 1, 2, 3. It goes, my voice is cracking terribly. I've been in meetings all day. But it goes 1, 1, 2, 3, etc., not 1, 2, 3, 4. That's not actually how the information is generated in the universe. It's kind of almost like a backwards look at what information was generated, but it's not how the information generates. You cannot just go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 in exactly like you. If you're thinking about starting from 1 and generating information, you have to, something has to be combined with itself in a way. I get that that's kind of odd, but we're going to deconstruct it in some models here. But if you think about the Fibonacci sequence, it should make sense. It goes 1, 1, 2, 3, 5, etc. So this question 1 answers is what is the first question? The answer to question 1, which is also answer 1, and obviously, is also question 2, which is, what is the first question? And this shows you that now you have to branch out a bit and build on this. And what you get next is, what is the truest thing that I know? And the only thing that you can know from this first self-answering question is the questioner. The only thing that you know to be true already in the first circumstance, in the first question, the information that can be generated from the first question is that there is a questioner. Okay? So you get, what is the truest thing that I know? What that I in there of the questioner is the information that comes from the first question, and that, the answer to that first question. But the fact that the question has been asked indicates that there is an I. There is a questioner, and a questioner is an I. It's a someone. It's not a something. There is no something that questions. Excel does not ask questions, but I ask questions and answer them in Excel. And so from there, it's also, again, answering itself almost, where what is the truest thing that I can know? I am is the answer. So question 3, which is what is the truest thing that I can know, is the second answer, because it builds on that first question, even though it doesn't seem like there's any information in that first question, because you're just asking what is the first question, and then it answers with itself. So how do you get any information from this? It seems like it would just spin around and go forever. Like, what is the first question? 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 And you would think that it would just spin and spin and spin. And to some degree it does. But it also grows. And it grows because there's hidden information in the question. And that is the questioner. The fact that the question exists indicates that there's more information outside of the question, which is that there's a questioner. And so the truest thing that you can know from this sequence of questions and answers, what is the truest thing that I can, or what is the first question? Answers with what is the first question. From this, you get what is the truest thing that I know? And the answer is I am. Always. This sequence right here is fundamental to all sense making. There is no sense making that can maintain coherence through all systems that is not built on this sequence. It is the first principle. It's the first question. It's the foundation. And it's amazing that this can even be gained. One of the things that I've realized, and I will just say this, in this project, is there are so many questions that I have thought I could never answer. How did the universe begin? What is the first question of questions? Like, that sounds like something that is unknowable. It's actually completely knowable. And it's also not even just knowable, it's essential. It's essential to know. Because as I said, if you want to be able to reason from first principles, aka from the first principle, or if you want to reason from first principles in all instances, I'm not saying that you will do this, I'm just saying if you want to be able to, nobody does this, in all instances, but if you want to have the ability to, then you need to start from the first principle. And that first principle is common to all circumstances. It's not situation specific. So when you're reading the Wikipedia page on first principles, and it's like, in philosophy and science, a first principle is a basic proposition or assumption which cannot be deduced from any other proposition or assumption. Okay. Name one of those that isn't this. You almost can't, because you are always going to be starting from all pre-existing assumptions in specific circumstances if you're not starting from the first principle, this. Because, like I said, if you're going to, solve a rocket problem with, like Elon Musk, you're like, how do we make rockets cheaper? Okay, well, what makes them expensive? Okay, that's kind of a first principles approach to understanding how to make rockets cheaper. Well, we can only use them once. Okay, well, you can only use them once, then if that's what makes it expensive, then we have to figure out a way to use them multiple times. And so you can kind of start to do that kind of thing, and that's how you get SpaceX. But that's a specific circumstance, and while you can apply that pattern in many different circumstances, you have to definitely know that you understand the problem that you're trying to solve in a given circumstance in order for that to work. Because without this, given a first principle that I'm talking about, because a good way to explain this is if you're good at anything, if you have a hobby, or you're just, you're an expert on, I don't know, coin collecting or something like that. You read a CNN article or Fox article or news article of some kind about coin collecting. You will read so many things that you know to be false. And it's because these people who are writing about this, they don't have any connection to this. They're just kind of like taking what other people say online, and they're, trying to build from the things that sound about right to them. And they do this with every single topic. But we do this with tons of topics. We do this with tons of topics. We don't have, absent this, we do not have a common starting point to judge all answers that we get in all different kinds of circumstantial and subjective problems that we try and solve throughout our lives. We don't have anything to judge the answers that we get by, that we don't have anything to build the questions that we need to ask by. And it's causing people to literally lose their ability to think logically throughout their lives. And everybody has the ability to, think logically. You think. Everybody thinks. And that doesn't mean, though, that you can maintain sense-making and coherence between subjective circumstances, or throughout subjective circumstances, or beyond subjective circumstances. You just know what you know, and you don't know what you don't know, and there's no way to know whether or not what you don't know is really, or what you think you know is actually true. Whether or not you really know what you think you know. And so this gives you a starting point. And, when I started this channel, there's a very old video on here that says, it's don't say the E word, which is esoteric. I try and avoid saying that word. And the reason why that was kind of part of, I made it its own specific video, even though it was a clip, is because so many things that are so fundamental to everything that we can know, to everything that we can do, are thought of as, or labeled as, esoteric today, which doesn't mean what it originally meant. Esoteric originally meant, esoteric definition, intended or likely to be understood only by a small number of people with a specialized knowledge or interest. But this word is now being applied to things that are like fundamental philosophical, concepts, fundamental metaphysical assumptions, things that are not specialized knowledge. They're things that should be universal knowledge. And it's also used to basically mean useless, or it's implied that anything esoteric is usually useless if somebody labels it as esoteric. Now, people who understand it wouldn't label it as esoteric, so it would be more useful to them. But people who don't understand things call them esoteric. And when I wrote this like one pager that I continue to update every few years, I tweak it and make it better. It's on my website, and here you go. You go to writings. I wrote this, the theory of every0ne, and it gets into, beyond the beginning, sentience exists, existence is sentient, and sentience is one. This, and etc. It goes on and on. You can read it. It's kind of a poetic description of existence and the logos of existence. Fundamental reality. That's what it is. A description of. And it's kind of poetic and symmetric and just, I don't know. I don't normally write things like that, but it just came to me. And there's a lot of it's just, it is truth. Like, there's just so much truth in that. I'm not saying there isn't a word that I could change that makes it better, but in general, it's all true. And it's not just true, it's fundamental truth. And I had, some people who tend to be very logical thinkers, think of themselves, though, as like very into philosophy, read it. And I was like, what do you think? And they were like, it's very esoteric. It's nice sounding. I like this line, but like, it's very esoteric, Tyler. And then they never, gave any other feedback, which basically means like, it's boring, it's useless, it's convoluted, it's not worth your time trying to understand. It's basically what it comes down to. Or your energy trying to understand it, your effort. But nothing could be further from the truth regarding this. It is imperative that people understand this. And, people say today, I think, therefore I am. Yeah, Descartes, he got it. I think, therefore I am. Even though I would say that's not actually as fundamentally accurate as you could be, even though it is accurate. Only someone can think, and if you can think, then you are. So that does make sense, but there is a more fundamental component to being, and that is feeling. So it's more, I feel, therefore I am. It's more fundamentally true. But it's not that I think, therefore I am is wrong. It's just that I feel, therefore I am is more fundamental. They're both correct. And they're just two sides of one coin, but one of them is heads and the other one is tails. And there's a directionality to it. And but what's interesting, though, about this is that, this Descartes statement is, while it is true, and like I said, it's not as fundamental of a statement as it could be, but it's still extremely fundamental, and it's also true. It's quoted all the time, but it's actually not acknowledged in the scientific world, or its implications and its lessons are avoided. In everything from physicists trying to, reconcile the measurement problem, which is not a problem, but it's considered a problem because of logical issues that arise from denying of I am. And uh, this, to physicists not being able to deduce things about the origins of the universe very much, and that's same exact issue is causing that. They're not placing the I am at the fundamental foundation of their first principles reasoning. And this, though, can be extrapolated up, not just from physics, even though first principles is normally associated with physics, everything that comes after physics. And that includes biology, chemistry, genetics, morality, sociology, economics, finance, everything that you could think of. Every field that you could think of, every question that you could think of, starts with understanding the foundational nature of existence, of truth, and building from that. But we don't do that in science today. We just quote it whenever we're trying to sound smart. We're like, Descartes said, I think, therefore I am. But guess what? Sam Harris, he says that the self doesn't exist. And I'm not saying, I don't know if he exactly said that, but we're going to get into it another day. But let's see here. Does the self exist? Is there such thing as the self? The self is an individual as the object of that individual's own reflective consciousness. The sense of having self or selfhood should, however, not be confused with subjectivity itself. Yeah, that makes sense. So, is the self real or an illusion? To Tufts University professor of philosophy, Daniel Dennett, our conception of the self is an illusion created by our experience of the world. Whose experience of the world? Whose experience of the world? It's insane. He offered an analogy of an object's center of gravity, which is an abstraction, not an actual concrete thing, yet we treat it as something real. I don't even understand why you would... I mean, I do understand why you would use that analogy. But what's funny here is that Daniel Dennett, in this, right here, what is the self? Is an illusion created by our experience of the world. He offered an analogy of an object's center of gravity, which is an abstraction, not an actual concrete thing, yet we treat it as something real. Does anybody here see what is so funny about this? It's this. This is exactly what Elon Musk said people do, and it is how people's logic often gets screwy, is they reason by analogy, not from first principles. I hear people do this in politics all the time, and I mean, even in firearms and things like that, you'll hear like, people think that the solution to guns is more guns, and it's like, then they'll make an analogy. They'll be like, the solution to a tiger is more tigers. But what's funny is that if you think about like wolves, it's like, what was the solution to wolves in the caveman era? It's like, dogs, more wolves, but aren't on our team. And while that's a much better analogy than the solution to more tigers is more tigers, because there's goals associated with it that are not just, ravenous man-eating beasts that you're just adding more of. It's like a dog is going to protect you from the wolves. The wolves are coming after you, like the tiger would, but you're getting an opposing force. So it makes sense as an analogy, but it's also not that great because it's going to break down eventually, because you're talking about objects versus sentient beings, and it's just not going to, the logic will not continue past this specific circumstance. And I will admit that. But the point is that if you use tigers, this doesn't make sense, this analogy. But if you use wolves, it does. And not only does it make sense, there's evidence of this, for thousands of years in humanity. People get dogs to protect livestock all the time. From what? From other canines. So you're using canines to protect, things from canines. So it's like almost the same exact thing. You have two predators. One of them is a tiger, one of them is a wolf. But the difference is in why one analogy works and the other one doesn't is because one of them has, happens to be domesticated and its goals have been turned in our direction. So this is why reasoning from analogy doesn't work, because this analogy is almost exactly the same in its, if you examined, what is being said just by the words itself in the question. Tiger isn't that different from a wolf, predators. But then in reality, when you put it into the context of human history, they're very different in the implications of these two analogies is extremely different. And neither of them is consistent enough and accurate enough to continue being logical and allowing you to sense make beyond the given circumstances of those specific analogies. So they're still limited. It's not just a matter of creating a good analogy, even though that does help explain things and concepts a little bit. It's not going to actually help you understand something fundamentally. It might help you understand it quickly in given circumstance, but not fundamentally. And in order to do that, you need to use first principles. And in order to do that, you need a first principle. And in order to have that, you need a first question. This is kind of even a first principles approach to figuring out what you need to reason from first principles is obviously a first question. A first question of everything. Of everyone. And, this question sequence, it blows my mind how just absolutely stunning it is. And, what's interesting is I wrote something. The best thing I've ever written is this quote that, let's pull it up. It's right here on my website. Right here. It's the best thing I ever wrote. So, and I have no idea where this came from. I know where it came from. It came from God. I can't write this. I'm not that good of a writer. I just couldn't do this if I tried. The search for truth is the search for objectivity. The search for objectivity is the search for symmetry. And the search for symmetry is the search for beauty. But the truest beauty is always the searcher, and the truth of the searcher is that they are symmetrical to the sought. What's amazing about this is the search for truth involves asking questions. And if you're asking fundamental questions, or you're searching for the fundamental question, the first question, you're searching for objectivity. You're searching for, I don't know whether or not it's the best to call it objectivity or super subjectivity, but if I say super subjectivity, nobody knows what I mean yet. So let's just call it objectivity. Basically meaning a question that is relevant in all circumstances. You're searching for that which is true always, not just from a subjective perspective, but from every subjective perspective, and which is the same thing as being true from an objective perspective. And so you're searching for something that's common or universal, something universal. And the search for objectivity, or the search for that which is universal, is the search for symmetry. And if you look here and you see that the first question answers itself with itself, that's symmetry. It's super symmetrical. It's a super symmetrical question. It's maybe the only super symmetrical question. And the next question is answered by information that's hidden in the answer to the first question, which is the fact that there is a questioner. And it then leads to, the final answer of the sequence, which is answer 3 of this kind of these 4 different parts, these 4 primary perspectives of fundamental, sense making. which is I am. And it says here, the search for search for objectivity, or the search for universality, is the search for symmetry, and the search for symmetry is the search for beauty. But the truest beauty is always the searcher. And the truth of the searcher is that they are symmetrical to the sought, which means they are a reflection of that which they are seeking. Okay? So the truest beauty, the truest truth is the searcher. It is the questioner. Okay? And this final statement is that they are symmetric. The searcher or the questioner is symmetrical to the sought, meaning the question or the answer. You could even say they are. If you're searching for the question, then the question is the answer. But if you're searching for an answer to a question, like what is the truest thing that I know, then you're searching. The sought in this case is the answer. So the answer. That's pretty funny. That's the been saying it meme, but that's not what I was trying to show. This is what I'm trying to show. The answer to what is the truest thing that I know is I am. So think about this sequence and how it relates to this. It's identical. It's the exact same thing. The truth of the searcher is that they are symmetrical to the sought, meaning the truth of the questioner is that they are a reflection of the answer to their question. Okay? That's what that means, is that the answer to their question is a reflection of themselves, or it is themselves, you could say. It's the same. It is the questioner. It's not a detached, non-sentient answer. The answer of the ultimate sequence of questions, the first sequence of questions, is a sentient being. It starts with a sentient being because that's who can ask a question. And it ends with a sentient being. I am. It starts with sentience, it ends with sentience, and it's got this beautiful symmetry throughout it. And it is perfectly aligned with this statement that I made, or that I wrote, I guess. I don't even consider myself having written this. Like, this is like, you know, people talk about like channeling, and I don't think you should try and channel things, because like I don't think that's usually a good idea. It usually leads to like some evil stuff. But I do think we all channel things. Every time we make a beautiful piece of music, it's channeled. Every time we have some kind of moment of genius, like a genius is a moment, it's not a person. Idiocy is also a moment, and it's usually not channeled, I would not think. Probably never channeled. But genius is a channeled moment. It's where you're so aligned with God that he just comes through you. And that's a real thing, you know? But I'm not claiming that you should go seek that, because you don't need to. You do it all the time. You just don't know. You should pay attention to when you do it, but don't try to do it. Because if you try to do it, you will fail. It's when your goal and God's goal is like aligned. And it's not. So if you want to increase your amount of things that come through you that are beautiful and true, you know, art or music or whatever it is that you're good at. I'm not very good at art or music usually. I'm good at photography. That's about it. And then you're going to want to just seek the truth, not seek to channel. Seeking to channel leads to, like, I don't know, evil stuff. Like I said, satanic type of stuff, as people call it. Whatever you call it, it doesn't matter. But things that are not in alignment with truth, because you're not seeking the ultimate truth. You're seeking a goal, to fulfill a goal that you have regarding yourself. And it's not just to know or see the truth. And you're not going to be able to do it. Like, you might think that you'll do it, because you'll channel something sometimes, but like, not, it's probably not going to be ultimate truth and beauty. It might just appear to be. But yeah, I mean, this is it's amazing that this statement lines up so much with this, that this and this are just the same thing. It's almost like my entire theory can be summed up in that one statement right there. But it can also really be summed up like here too. Beyond the beginning, sentience exists. Existence is sentient, and sentience is one. It's kind of like the ultimate distillation of sentient singularity theory. But it doesn't include... That's like the foundation of sentient singularity theory. It's not the totality of it. It's the beginning and the end of sentient singularity theory, but it's not the middle pattern, which is what the theory really is, in a detailed form, which is a recognizable, describable, predictable, and applicable pattern that occurs in all instances between this, the beginning and the end of, sentience being one. Between the singularity of sentience in the beginning of this process and the singularity of sentience at the end is multiplicity. And so that pattern of multiplicity is what sentient singularity theory is kind of focused on describing. But it can't be actually described or constructed or understood without understanding its context, which is, that. And I, as the person asking the questions to deduce all of these things, trying to figure out problems and construct models, I cannot do any of that without this. Oh, that's so funny that I keep doing that. Without this. For those of you that don't know, this is just it's just a hilarious meme of a phrase that I say a lot. It's just a quote from Independence Day. It's just very funny. I don't know. I love it. But I keep hitting it because it's one of the options on my OBS streaming. It's like right next to the questions that I've been showing. So, yeah, I'm gonna, get your questions in the chat, and we'll talk more about this. But we'll look at how this relates to math as well, because there is mathematical evidence that this is correct. Torin, what's up? Memes of Destruction, what's up? How's it going? And start using AI for your thumbnails. Everyone else is right now, or will soon be. I know, I've thought about it. I will probably start using it. I know other content creators are using AI right now. And honestly, it's probably going to be like awesome, because it's going to save me so much time. But I kind of want to do that on the stream, like live. I want to see what we can build with it, and what matters to, how you get a good end result that's actually conveying of what you want to convey. And I'm waiting till my upgraded computer arrives, which is very soon. Like, it has been decided on, and I'm ordering it after the stream. So I know I've been mentioning it, but it's, we made a decision today. I couldn't decide whether or not to get the 14 or 16-inch laptop. That's really what it came down to. And I had to go see them. But I like things to be compact, and you can always hook it up to a monitor, which I have here. So I don't know. I'm going with the small one. Which AI should I use for thumbnails? I know of some that other people are using, but I'm curious to see what your recommendation would be. But I will try at least the ones that other people have been using right now. And I forgot the name of it, but I have it written down. I saw your video by Echoplex Media. What is their issue? You should teach them your theories. You know, trusted source, uh, Preston, that's your name. Well, not good to have you here, Preston. I did see that Echoplex Media video that they made about me, and I have considered going on their stream to talk to them. The issue is one of them appears to be, you know, curious, and I trust he'd probably, you know, speak to me in good faith. The other one is not going to do that. I don't think at right now, and so as of right now, even though I've been debating it, I have decided not to. And you know, I didn't know he talks on there about me blocking him, and I don't know. It's just some guy, guys. For those of you who don't know, some guy made a video. You can look it up, trying to go through an interview that I did and go through my theories. And I didn't realize it until I saw this, but he was someone who was just once on Twitter and was uh, sharing pictures, screenshots of my models and saying things about them that were not true. And I was like, hey man, I'm happy to explain these to you, but what you're saying about them is inaccurate. And so, you know, I'd appreciate it if you didn't do that. And he continued to do it. And I was like, if you do it, you know, continuously, I'm just going to block you because I don't want to be constantly getting notifications being tagged in something that's just going to piss me off. And, you know, he can do what he wants, but he didn't stop, so I blocked him. So I know he talks about that in there, and I tend to be against people blocking people. But if someone's goal is to annoy you, like that's their goal. It's not just they're like saying something that is you don't like hearing. It's like their goal is just to, you know, act in bad faith. Block them. Like that is a different thing. And I've blocked plenty of people for plenty of reasons. Most of them do not have to do with my work. Probably that's the only time I think I've ever blocked anyone for anything related to my work, but it wasn't really related to my work. It was more that I just kept getting notifications and it was annoying. But, you know, I've thought about going on streams of people who are critical of my work. And if I'm ever invited by them and I believe that they're going to act in good faith, you know, I would do so probably. You know, I mean, that channel is very small. I don't remember how small it was, but I would go on anyone's channel no matter how small it is. Like that's not like the point. But it was, you know, if it was an enormous channel and you know what people were saying, you know, a bunch of false assumptions about my work online, I would have cared more about addressing the video, at least in my own video, maybe. But I thought about doing a commentary on their video, doing commentary on my video, but I haven't done that yet. I've still been thinking about it, but I would go on there to talk to that one guy he didn't agree with what I was saying, and he was saying all kinds of things that have so many assumptions built into them that it's like you're gonna have to spend hours deconstructing these assumptions. You know, like I said, you need to start from first principles. This is the first principle. You need to start from here in understanding the world. And that's not what they were starting. They were like, you know, everybody knows that, you know, atoms aren't sentient or something like that. And that wasn't exactly it, I don't think, but something along those lines multiple times. Just all things that are common narrative in science, and I get that, but they're not true according to my work, and so I'm arguing against those things. So you can't judge my work in the context of things that is not the context of my work. But yeah, I mean, if anyone is critical of my work and they're genuinely curious and want to, you know, speak to me publicly, even as long as I think that they're going to act in good faith, I would do it. I'm not completely convinced it would be worth my time to like be in a stream with both of those guys. I would imagine probably what would happen is one of them would try and act in good faith, and the other one would get angry that I was making so much sense. And you know, the guy even says in the stream, he said to his like stream partner, "You're taking this much more seriously than I am. Like, you know, I'm just here to joke about it." And you know, I'm fine with jokes, but like, that's not the type of joking that is, I don't know, valuable. Like, you're just angry about it for whatever reason. I don't know what reasons he has, not him, but Um, that happens a lot when you're working on models and things related to fundamental reality. If somebody makes a lot of sense, like I said in my video, Theories of Everything, the How-To Guide, that was entered into the PACE 1 contest that Kirchheim Ungel put on, I said in there that people get very hostile to your work if you actually are, displaying some competence. And it's because it undermines their understanding and, or their perception, their perceived expertise, things like that they built their identity on, and that is something that's unique to working on fundamental theories or theories of fundamental reality, and that are also unique to models that make a decent amount of sense to people. So, for instance, there was this guy, and I watched his video today. He made it, I think, a year ago, but I had never seen it until now. Some guy, I don't remember, the channel name, but he made a video giving commentary on my video called Space-Time and the Observerse, which I made at the very beginning of this channel, and it's not a live stream. It's trying to explain a structure that I see that I think is Eric Weinstein's Observerse in his theory. And at least it's highly related, if it's not exactly that. But he goes through it in good faith. And he's like, the whole time, he's like, this is making a lot of sense. That makes sense. Like, he's just pausing it and explaining what I said, as best as he understands it, and pretty well. He was doing great. And it was a shame that it took so long for me to see this. So, but the fact that there are people that can do that with my work, who actually like watch an entire video, shows that it makes a lot of sense. I mean, I don't need like the validation. But it's good to see it makes sense to other people, is what I'm trying to say. It helps. Like, the goal of this is not just for me; it's to explain it and make significant progress over time. In figuring out ways to explain these concepts. Even today, I came up with the name subspace-time to explain that observerse. I was like, it's not space-time because it's what's responsible for space-time. It's like more fundamental to space-time. The 4D space that is responsible for the perception of space-time it's not space-time, but it's still four-dimensional. And so it's like, what is that space? It's subspace. So I was like, it's subspace-time. And like, just developing terms like that over the years has helped me explain these things. And you need to do that to present novel models and or at least in models of fundamentality in a novel way. You need to find new terms and create models in a different form than you would otherwise in a more subjective field. Like, you can't just use a bunch of equations the same way that you can in I don't know, like general relativity, like a paper on general relativity, because you need to start from the first principle of even mathematics. So you need to start from one and have quantities, but not just quantities, but the functions, the equations themselves build from one and build themselves. So like, algebra doesn't exist yet on the level that I'm working. Okay, it is constructed by what is in the models that I've been working on, but it is not able to be used in order to fundamentally model what I'm trying to show, because it doesn't exist yet. So it's very, very unique problem to work on, fundamental reality, and it freaks people out because, like I said, also it seems like pseudoscience, because all of a sudden everything has meaning, everything has symmetries, everything has what do people call it? Not symmetries, but synchronicities. And those synchronicities are like super literally true. So, when people say things like, "Oh, numerology, it's crazy," that's just crazy people stuff, or astrology, that's just crazy people stuff. I'm not saying that I don't know anything about numerology or astrology, and I don't think that most people have the ability, or maybe even anyone, to use those for anything other than, I don't know, getting things, identifying general trends. I don't think that it, in its current, context, is able to be mathematically precise the way, or noticeably mathematically precise. So I'm not advocating that all of a sudden we just start reading each other's horoscopes and we'll know all the answers. But there is a structure that is the cosmos, that is spinning and going through certain motions, that does have a cyclic nature to it, and it's beyond astronomy. It's metaphysics. It's the motion of metaphysics. It's the cyclic nature of metaphysics that is what astrology originally was. But we don't even talk about metaphysics, so you can't have the right context for astrology. Same thing with numerology. We have mathematics, but we don't have, which is true too, but it's different than what numerology is, numerology is the study of the objective meaning of numbers, which just sounds insane. But that's actually ultimately must be a truth, something that truly exists, is that numbers have specific meaning that coincide with where they contextually manifest in a generative model of the cosmos, of the metamathematics of the cosmos. So, like, to start talking about meaning according to numbers in my models or something like that, even though I'm not looking on numerology websites, because that is not first principles. That's relying on them, which I don't know where that information came from. I have no idea. Like I said, I don't study numerology. I don't study astrology. So I don't know where this stuff came from. But I would assume that it came from a metaphysics understanding eons ago. But that doesn't mean that it's well understood now, so I can't build on it. But I can tell you that the models that I've created from first principles of the growth of information in the cosmos show that there is a context to everything, and that context is information, and that information will tell you what something means. Not as in meaningfulness, as in like filling you with meaning, but like, 33 might represent self-awareness. It seems to in my model. 42 might represent awareness of self plus awareness of the construct that you are within, being a self as well. So, and it seems to in my model, because of where it manifests in these information growth matrices that I make. But that seems like pseudoscience. So it's very easy to ridicule, because, without the context that goes into creating those circumstances and those models, you're just going to seem like you're just making up, the meaning of words, or the meaning of, not the meaning of words, the meaning of numbers or something. And that's not what I'm doing. That was kind of one of those crazy things that I realized from this work, is like, I was the most, numerology is insane, like astrology is insane type of person, self-described materialist atheist, before this project. And then you come to realize, like, yeah, numbers have objective meaning. That doesn't mean I know their meaning. There's a few that are pretty obviously implied in my work, but others I have no idea, so I don't try and figure it out either. Like, if it's not obvious to me what the circumstances are, the context of where a specific number manifests, then I don't try and ascribe meaning to it. I know there's meaning, I just don't know what it is, and I don't try and like figure it out that much. Like, it should be obvious. So if it's not obvious, I just acknowledge that it has meaning of some type, and hopefully one day I figure it out. But without trying actively to like ascribe meaning to it, because then you're gonna then your goal is different from what it than just understanding the context. Your goal is to associate that with some explanation, which is not the goal. The goal is to find a truthful context, and that's it. So, but I understand why it seems like pseudoscience, and that's why people make so easy to make fun of. But that's if you don't actually watch more than like 5 minutes of my videos. So it's not easy to criticize this work if you have even watched one full stream of my streams, I would think. I don't know for sure because I'm not an outside observer, but just judging from everything that I've seen regarding my interactions with people who do watch an entire stream and who are genuinely curious, that doesn't mean I've convinced them of my theory, but they acknowledge that it's not insane and random, which there is no way for anything to be random. The idea that randomness even exists is insane. It's like one of the few things that is truly insane. Hello, Marco. Saw a video. Okay. I would, but like I said, I would be very open to talking to anybody who's a critic, right now, if they're willing to take it seriously and they want to put effort into understanding it, truly, they're going to act in good faith. And that might be them one day, but I don't know yet, because one of them I would think would do it, and one of them I don't, because he said it. Have you heard of dialetheism? I don't know what that is. I might have to look that up right now. It's better not be anything terrible. Probably not. Dialetheism is the view that there are statements that are both true and false. I don't actually think that that's correct. And I've had so many debates with this with people on this before, and that paradoxes are fundamentally true, but that's not actually fundamental. There is a level in which paradoxes between the subjective and the absolutely fundamental, where paradox does appear to be the truth, like something like you are many and one beings, many sentiences and one. God is many sentiences within one, essentially. So things like that, just paradoxical things that appear to be paradoxes. But they're not when you actually understand them. Like or the idea that something is a particle in a wave, even, like, that is not even true. If you understand the context of what's causing that observation, you would realize that it's not a particle and a wave at the same time at all. It's a wave, and you're perceiving points on a wave that's moving. That's why you can't measure its velocity and its position at the same time. Pick a point on a wave in the ocean that is moving and measure its velocity and its location at the same time. You cannot do it. And so, at least not precisely. The same exact thing happens with, fundamental elementary particles, which really should be called points. Like quarks should be called force points. Electrons probably focus points, something like that. But the problem is in our terminology is creating assumptions that are not compatible, but it's not actually paradoxical if you actually understood the context. So I don't believe that there are things that are both true. And dialetheism, yeah, I do know this word. I've heard James Sirius. I always mispronounce his name. He needs to tell me, like, say it to me next time we have a call. But I just read it always, and I'm gonna mess it up. But I did an interview with him, and you can see it on my channel and on his new Theories of Nothing channel. I highly suggest checking it out. I think it's brand new, but he's a very good interviewer, so I expect lots of good videos to be coming. But he said this to me once, and I didn't know what he meant, and now I know what he meant. but it makes perfect sense because he was arguing that fundamental paradoxes are true, and I would say that the paradox is always due to a limited perception. There are no paradoxes in the context of ultimate and complete truth. There is no paradoxes. I think we were not arguing, but discussing. He was saying that nothingness exists in the mind of God because God is, all there is. So, but he knows that there could be more, and even to think that there's no one else means that or nothing else means like that nothingness exists as a concept in his mind, but as a concept, which is in the context of a specific, like mental circumstance. So nothingness, because I was saying nothingness can't exist fundamentally. It's a subjective perception. Because for it to exist fundamentally would mean that reality was paradoxical, that non-existence and existence can coexist, and that's not true. So I don't agree with dialetheism in a fundamental context. Maybe in a subjective emergent context, sure, but even then it's more accurate to say that there's a perceived paradox than to actually say that there is a paradox. So I think Chris Langan said something similar. It's that like God resolves all paradoxes, which really is the same thing as saying ultimately or fundamentally there are no paradoxes, but there are emergent paradoxes that are then reconciled to no longer be paradoxes, or there are paradoxes that are emergently perceived, but ultimately no. And so dialetheism. Three objections that have been raised against the justification of dialetheism. Firstly, it has been claimed that exactly the same argument supports principle of contradiction. Secondly, it has been questioned whether the arguments preserve their value when logic is subject to revision. And thirdly, it has been claimed it's not showing me the rest. Okay. This is a whole paper. I might have to read this. The case of dialetheism. Marcin, I'm not even going to try and pronounce his last name. It's not, but guys, names are not my strong suit, so I apologize for every name I botch in my life, but I do it a lot. Okay, it's gonna take, of course this is gonna come into play here. It's gonna take time for me to like read through this, but I downloaded the paper and I'm actually curious. But and I have to learn this more. I've looked at, this symbolism and this philosophical symbolism, I don't even know what it's called, before, but it's been a while. The mathematical language of philosophy. But yeah, I mean, paradoxes do not fundamentally exist. So, but they are emergent perceptions, obviously, and you do have to contend with them when they are perceived, but they can be resolved always. It's the idea that there aren't true contradictions. Okay, yeah, you answered the question. I didn't see it yet. Yep, but without even ever knowing intellectually how or why there is anything at all in the first place. I know exactly why there is something, and not even just something, but someone that exists fundamentally. I know why there is nothing. Why there isn't nothing, which just doesn't make, that's something that might be an emergent paradox, that specific statement even. But it is because existence by definition and by its by its very nature, must be one, which means it's self-contained, and that it means it is its own information, and that its information is contained within it, and not, and that means that it is referencing of the self. Existence, the oneness of existence, is it is its own information. It is contained within itself, basically, which means it's self-referencing. So even like linguistically, it's self-referencing. So if you say it is its own information, meaning there isn't information in existence if there's only fundamental existence. If there's only fundamental existence that exists, which it must exist, because to say then it must be one, and it must be self-referencing linguistically and logically and metaphysically. But the problem with this this whole situation, when you're like, oh, does nothingness exist? Or when somebody says, why is there something rather than nothing? It's a self-answering question. What? Of course, you're saying, why is there something rather than nothing? You can't say, really, why is there nothing fundamentally? You can say it emergently, subjectively, but in specific circumstances, why is there no apples in my fridge right now? Or why is there nothing in that box? But you can't say, why is there nothing? Because you're already said, is there? And you've already asked the question, which, that gets even deeper. But to say, why is there something rather than nothing? You can't say, why isn't there nothing? Because it's the same as asking why. Because if there was nothing, then there was nothing, or there is nothingness that exists, which doesn't make sense. So we're constrained by the language that we're using in this circumstance. It's very hard to explain, but I'm trying. I'm sure I could do better if I thought about it longer. But we're constrained by the language that we have access to in this question, because there is no word for fundamental non-existence. Because there can't be. Okay? You can't have a word for it. So you can't even try and come up with a word for it, and then it will allow it to make sense. No, it's impossible for there to be anything that represents non-existence fundamentally. Because if the only thing that could represent non-existence fundamentally is non-existence, or that which is non-existent. You can't have something that exists represent something that is non-existent fundamentally. Yes, subjectively, sure, but not fundamentally. So this is, I say this all the time, but there are bad questions. There are so many bad questions. It's not even, I hate that they taught us this in school. Oh, there's no bad questions. That's so not true. There are so many bad questions. Bad questions aren't able to give you the answer that you're seeking because of the way they're structured. So even to say, what is the theory of everything? You can't actually come up with one, because that question is wrong, because there isn't a fundamental theory of everything that's truly as fundamental as it gets. There's a theory of every0ne. And built within and built on that theory of every0ne is a theory of everything. Because there is a theory of their perceivers is the fundamental theory, and then built on top of that is the theory of their perceptions, which is the things. So there is no theory of everything. There's a theory of every being, but not a theory of everything. There's a theory of every0ne, but there's not a theory of everything. So you can't actually answer this question of what is the theory of everything without answering a preceding question, which leads to a more accurate, framework of the question that will actually give you the answer that you're seeking, which is a fundamental theory. But they tell you, no, there's no bad questions. Bullshit. There are so many bad questions. I said something today to my friends in just a chat that I was talking to them in. It's so funny. And my friend said something about how, they tell you that everything's going to be different when you get out of school. Things are going to be now very serious and you're going to have to behave professionally and blah, 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 something like that. And he was just showing that, I don't know, people were just like, thanks, with like a bunch of like exclamation points. And they were just making jokes that were things you would say to your friends. And, teachers say all kinds of things to justify the circumstances that they've put you in and the circumstances that maintain their job. But they say all kinds of wrong things. And I responded to him. I was like, they told us so many lies. And I listed some. I said, you'll never, they used to tell us, you won't always have a calculator. You won't always then it was, you won't always have spell check. Then it was, you won't always have Google. Then it was, and I just was joking. I was like, you won't always have someone to plagiarize off of or something like that. You're like, you won't always have the smart kids' homework to copy. And then I was like, and now in school, they're telling people, you won't always have ChatGPT to, do your calculations for you, search the internet for information for you, check your spelling for you, and write your essay for you. And it's like, you now always have ChatGPT with you if you have a cell phone. How crazy is that? It's like everything that they keep telling us that we won't always have with us, we will. The one thing that we don't always have with us, but we always could have with us, is the ability to think. And you have to know how, though. And there is a very specific way in which we can think. There are not multiple ways to think. As Elon Musk said accurately, people try and reason by analogy, but that's not actually reasoning. It's like, it's more like the outsourcing of reasoning. You're letting somebody else create the analogy, or you are, kind of not committed to truly understanding something. So you're like constructing an analogy and saying, yeah, well, that kind of makes sense, and just abandoning it. School doesn't teach you how to think. It's not even that it doesn't teach you how to think. It can't teach you really how to think in most circumstances, because no one can teach you how to think. You have to learn. So I can actually show you models of what the thinking process is, and I can give you, not that, that is not the thinking process. I did it again. That's so funny. I need to change the order of those so that that's not a constant thing. But I can give you this, which is the foundation from which to think from. But if you don't even think through this and really realize it and internalize it yourself, then even you're outsourcing your own thinking to me. And it's not going to be able to be maintained consistently if you don't understand how to do it. The first model that I ever made in this project is a thinking code. Basically, it's a decision tree. It was this is the very first model I ever made in this project. And it is about how to think. And so this I added later. And it's basically what I just showed you. And this is the foundation of even this first. But this is how we think. And I just kind of like mapped it on myself. I was just thinking about how I think about things and the logic of thinking. What is it? And, what does it start with, which is will, the desire to do that which is not being done. And you have to reject the current default status, assume the opposite of the current default status is true, and test against it. And right now we're just, when people criticize my work very often, speaking of that, they will reject it, but they don't say something else that's like, they don't propose an alternative to be true, so, and you can't, and then test for that. So you can't actually understand anything by doing this. Rejection of something is not understanding it. I've told this story before where I went to a math and physics Discord, a couple of years ago. And I had stated that I thought that this where is it? Come on. this right here. Let's just go to sentientsingularity.com. Go to models. I propose that this holonic periodicity that it's a lineage based holonic periodicity of the growth of beings in the universe. And I proposed that I thought that this was Bott periodicity in mathematics, which was, I guess, deduced or created by Raoul Bott. And Eric Weinstein talks about it sometimes, but he's never explained it publicly, like what it is. But I think that it's this. And I said that I thought that it was that. And this mathematician or math PhD student, that's what he was, messaged me and he's like, Tyler, I think that you don't understand like these physics terms and these math terms that you're using, but I'm happy to like explain them to you. And I was like, cool, let's do it. And we jumped into a voice channel, and he's like talking to me about what Bott periodicity is and how it's not what I think it is. And I was like, okay, I see it's a loop, a bunch of loop spaces or loops within loops, whatever, a mathematical, structural, geometric language you want to use. But that's actually supportive of what I'm saying. It's not contradicting in any way. So I don't understand, what you're saying. How does that mean it's not what I'm saying it is? I'm not saying that I'm right. I'm just saying like what you're saying doesn't contradict what I'm saying. And then there was people who jumped in the room and they were just watching this, and it's a guy who was like, asks this math PhD student, what is Bott periodicity? And he's like, well, it's a series of loop spaces. And I like jumped in and I was like, no, like what is it is what he's asking. Like point to it. Don't just tell me it's a series of loop spaces. What are the loop spaces? Like, are they cells? Are they the mathematical structures that are responsible for the generation of cells? Are they the mathematical structure of thinking? Like, what is it? And the answer to that is, both. Those are true. But and he was like, I, and he kind of just started stumbling over his words, and he's like, I know it's not what Tyler says it is. And the guy rightly said, I didn't even have to do it. He was like, the guy who challenged the PhD student. It's like, okay, well, what we've learned from this is that Tyler might be wrong. We don't know. He might be right. He might be wrong. But what we do know is that you don't know what Bott periodicity is. But that guy would probably take a test on Bott periodicity in his school classroom, in university, and test highly. And that just shows like, we don't actually have a first principles understanding of the things that we think we do. But you cannot just say it's not, I know it's not that, but not know what it is. You have to know what something is in order to understand it truly. You can't know what it's not in order to understand it truly. That doesn't mean that understanding that something isn't something else can't, or perceiving that or feeling that can't help you, help guide you. One of the things that kind of kicked off this project, but years earlier, before it even started, was an interest in just morality and politics. And that I had, recently figured out the importance of. And I didn't know what it meant to be good yet. Like, I was trying to figure it out. But what I did know, what I could see almost, was that, like, I could see what was evil by its effects. And I could feel what is evil by its effects, or what is bad by its effects, what is immoral by its effects. Judge something by its fruit. Okay? You don't need to know what kind of, I don't know, like how old a tree is, or what, I don't know, something about like specifics of a tree, if you just can judge it by its fruit, and you can judge something by its fruit. If you look at a community and you don't understand their values, but their families are healthy and good, and they get married and they have children and they stay married and they succeed in their goals and, I don't know, like have successful families and things like that, you can tell that those things, even if you don't understand why they're good, you can kind of see that they're good because you can feel that. You can know what is a tragic situation from your own first person perspective. You know what is a human tragedy and what is human flourishing, to some degree. Yeah, it doesn't mean you can't lose sight of it and misunderstand it, but you can feel it, I think. But it takes a lot of humility as well to like acknowledge at certain times, I will say, especially when it's involving you specifically and not someone else. But I think Jung said something about this, is like, and I've heard Jordan Peterson talk about it too, is how you can kind of start to understand what is good by understanding what is not. But that only works in circumstances in which you have a first person understanding of what it feels like for something to be tragic and not, or feels like for something to be successful. And you do have that with humans because you are human. So you know what makes you upset in a family circumstance. So you know what is not good because you felt it. So if people get divorced and you went through that as a kid, you're not going to look at divorce and be like, divorce is a good thing, we should all strive to get divorced. You're like, no, that hurt. Or your parents didn't get divorced and hopefully that was instilled good feelings in you. But it's not always going to be so clear. It's not as clear as what is good as what is not good in certain circumstances. But you can't actually get complete clarity by focusing on what is not good. You have to focus on what is good. But sometimes the movement to that is caused by seeing that which is not good. This same exact logic applies to, understanding a physics problem or whether or not my work is right or wrong or something like that. People can't tell me that my theory is wrong unless they have an alternative theory and reasons for it that is opposed to mine. I said this to Tim Nguyen, I think is how you pronounce his last name, who basically wrote the paper debunking quote-unquote geometric unity, him and the pseudonym field theorist who, it is cowardly to use a pseudonym. I don't care if it's the exact same thing that you wrote. It's cowardly to use a pseudonym, and it's wrong. You're not taking this as seriously enough to put your face on it. Then why should someone else who doesn't know you take it seriously? But regardless, but Tim and this guy field theorist, I think field theorist had a big problem with my work too in some Discord communities. The guy who wrote that paper against geometric unity, I've interacted with him a long time ago, and they weren't the most positive interactions, if I remember properly. But they wrote this paper, and I said to Tim that you can't judge a theory of everything unless you have one of your own. You can't know that one is wrong. You can maybe even if you believed in one that currently exists, you could say that you believe geometric unity is wrong if you think that string theory is true and you think that they're incompatible. It doesn't have to be your own theory, but it has to be a theory that is in contradiction to another theory that you have to believe, whether you came up with it or someone else. And if you don't know what is the fundamental theory and you don't have any clue, and you're like, I don't know if it's string theory, I don't know if it's this, I don't know if it's theism, whatever, but I know it's not geometric unity. You can't actually know that. You can't. You might think that you can, but it's usually because you're basing your logic on assumptions that are not formed from first principles. That those assumptions are things that you assume, and they are usually things that you have heard secondhand, from secondhand information. Like if you're taught, that 3 billion years ago, 4 billion years ago, life emerged on Earth. And you're like, okay, yeah, life emerged on Earth. I can assume that now. And because life emerged on Earth 4 billion years ago, I know that God doesn't exist. I did exactly that. That was my exact reasoning when my rabbi asked me if I believed in God when I was 13. And I told him no, because like the Earth has been here way longer than, 6,000 years or whatever. And that was, I was building from assumptions that I didn't understand myself. And it destroyed my ability to maintain logic in that discussion. And it didn't even know, I didn't know how long the Earth has been here. I don't know how long ago life emerged, but also I'm building on the assumption that we even understand what is life. Sentient singularity theory, in the context of my work, life doesn't start at cells. It doesn't ever start. It is the only thing that can exist is sentient beings. So, and they've always existed. One has always existed. Always. But if you're assuming that life starts at cells, then yeah, you're starting from this false premise according to my work. But it's certainly an assumption that you don't know. How do you know an atom isn't alive? You don't know. There's no evidence whatsoever that an atom is not alive. There is evidence that it is. And people will say, well, no, it doesn't metabolize and blah, blah, blah. You're literally defining life based on subjective, secondhand, assumptions that have been told to you, that you don't know why metabolism is a requirement for life. There's still radioactive decay and things that are maybe not exactly metabolism, but not that far off from metabolism on the atomic scale. So there's so many assumptions that are built into, so many things that we think we know. And that is a big problem if you don't also have one thing that you know that applies to every circumstance, which is that. Not that. That. And that's another reason why I need to figure out how I would approach conversing publicly with people who are being critical of my work, because I don't want it to be a debate. It can't be. The reason why is because if they say something like, we know that life has to have metabolism, so we know that atoms aren't alive. And I say something like, how do we know that things that are alive must have a metabolism? When we say what is alive, what is life, what do we really mean by that question? Because I think it's a terrible question. It's another bad question. What is life is a bad question. It can get you to the right question, but you have to really approach it from some fundamental truths that are definitely true, like that. If you know this, then you can answer the question of what is life. But if you don't know this, and you don't think that this is accurate, you cannot actually answer what is the question, what is life? Because you have to know that foundationally, I am is the nature of existence. And that you must trust that, or else you're not being logical. There's nothing that truer that you know. There's nothing that you know more certainly than that you exist, by the very nature of you asking the question itself. So, but to say, what is life? First of all, look at what the definition of life is now. You can't, in order to answer the question that we're trying to answer, we have to realize that there's a better question to answer what we're trying to actually answer with the question, what is life? Which is, what is sentient? When we say, what is life? What we mean is, what is a living being and what is not? And what is a being is the key there. And what is a being is a sentient being. There is no non-sentient beings. There's non-sentient things that we perceive, but there isn't non-sentient beings. So you can't answer this question of what is life without actually starting from that. So this is why it's not always the best context for me to just like argue with people who are being critical of my work, because there's so much built in that you have to figure out in order to understand my work too. Or you have to at least assume for the sake of argument. And if you assume it for the sake of argument, what you'll see is that there's logical coherence to my work, even if you don't believe it. Even if you think the self is an illusion, if you would trust that the self, if you assume for the sake of argument and you're trying to steel man my perspective and you're like, okay, I'll just, grant you that sentience and that the self or someone is the foundation of, is what foundational reality is. And that we must assume that to be true, which, by the way, there is no escaping the logic of that. You can't. But even if you refuse to see that, if you grant me that, then all of a sudden, most of the stuff that I say is going to make sense. And you'd have to do that though, in order, and at which case I'm just explaining myself. I'm not having a debate. It's not, there is no point to a debate in most cases of anything, actually. And I used to love debates. When I first, before I started working at PragerU and also, shortly after, and just my experience, I was so focused on, the politics of the time and debate was a huge thing. Ben Shapiro destroys, and then I saw that happen in real life many, many times. So many times that I realized nobody is speaking to each other. They are speaking past each other here. And that doesn't mean there isn't a purpose to having some type of public discussion where you do just kind of show that someone's wrong, logically, because for the sake of the audience. But that isn't acting in good faith with the person that you're engaging with and that you've actually consented to engage with personally. So that's why I don't like debates, is even if they have some type of value to the audience in picking up what is logical and what is not, they have a the incentives are such that they intrinsically guide you towards emotional arguments over time. And particularly the larger the crowd, the more likely that is to be the case. The larger and less invested the crowd, the more likely you are to win over the crowd with emotional arguments that aren't. They're not arguments. They're just with emotional statements to arouse the emotions of the crowd, but which is manipulative. But if you're gonna approach this logically and in good faith and from first principles, I just need to sit down and have a talk with somebody who's willing to spend the time necessary to understand the context in which I am constructing my theory or model or opinion from. And that's it. So they're not even judging whether or not I'm correct or not. They're just judging whether or not I'm correct in the context of assuming that my first principle is correct. And it is correct. They just, the fact that there's anyone that you're someone is just proof that this is correct. You cannot, there's no more first principle. There's no more first person information than you can get than the fact that you exist. First person information, first person experience is the basis of the first principle and is the basis of the first question that is the foundation of everything. So there is no escaping that. But so this is why I'm hesitant to just get on streams with people and argue, because I will admit I'm human too. I would eventually probably start making arguments that would appeal to the emotions of the audience watching, and not intentionally, but just it would just, if somebody's acting in good faith, in bad faith, or they're not actually being honestly trying to understand you. This is why steel manning is so helpful. Um, and they're just constructing a bunch of straw man, uh, or foundations of straw for what you're stating, then you can't actually argue with them in good faith, even if they are not arguing with you in good faith. So it's best to just not, because it's like when your parents always told you people aren't, it's not true completely, but when they're like, your friends, are going to drag you down, they're not going to, raise you up. And to some degree, there's some kind of truth to that, is like, but it's not fundamentally true. But that is actually literally true, though, in a debate. Like, if you're like, oh, I'm here in good faith, and and you're trying to make logical arguments, and they're just like making jokes to try and arouse the audience, what's the point? So, but if anyone ever wants to have a good faith discussion with me, and they're a critic of my work, I would be happy to. But there's like axioms built into that situation itself that are like, make that rare, because to want to truly understand my work means that you're already probably looking into it, if you truly want to understand it, which means like you probably don't feel the need to debate with me after that. You're just like, okay, I see what he's saying. If you assume this to be the true, then that makes sense. And then maybe they'd be just like content to leave it at that. So I don't know. I have not decided on how to handle debates, or critics. I don't want to say debates, because I don't want to debate anybody. That's just not how I want to deal with this. I also don't really want to interview people that much. I'd rather have a discussion with people, which is hard to do. Like I've said before, I'm hoping to. I made a list of people that I want to interview on this channel. Not interview, have discussion with on this channel, and that is not for the sake of people understanding their work. Kurt Mungo does such a, and others, so many other people who have interviewed all these people, Chris Langan and Donald Hoffman, and all these other people who have been on all these channels talking about fundamental reality. These people have done great jobs interviewing them to show what is their work. I mean, Kurt goes for hours interviewing people on the details of their work. Much better than I could. But I want to have a discussion with them that is like different. And the only way I can the only thing I can point to that's similar is like the discussion that was had on the Portal podcast between Roger Penrose and Eric Weinstein. That was great. That's what I'm kind of more interested in having. Or like him and Garrett Lisi, more so than like here's a debate between Stephen Wolfram and Eric Weinstein, and which theory is gonna beat all the others or something, or just let me ask you about your work, and can you please explain it to us again, as you've done on so many other channels, better than I could do. I think that those people who are doing those interviews are doing a better job than I could do. So otherwise, if I thought I could do a better job than them, then I would try and do that. But I don't think that I could. I don't have enough of an academic background in this stuff. So, but yeah. Anyways. Yep, but without ever even knowing intellectually how or why there is anything in the first place. Oh yeah, I answered that. Like, there can only be something. There can only be existency. Only existence can exist. Non-existence cannot exist. That is a paradox that we can say, but cannot actually fundamentally exist. Because to say that there would be nothing instead of something, you're saying there would be nothing. There can't be nothing. There's only for something to be, it would have to be. We don't even have the words to say this properly because it's impossible. It's not even that we have to figure it out. Like I've tried. I wrote an entire thing, and it's in one of my earlier videos that isn't a stream. I think it's Intro to Sentient Singularity Theory. I read something that I wrote called Reimagining One and Zero. And it's about how nothingness cannot exist, and how existence is intrinsically one by definition. And so I've already like explored this deeply. It's not like I'm just doing it here. This was years ago. But I hate that question though. Why is there something rather than nothing? I'm not critical of anybody asking it. I understand why people ask it, but it's also, once you understand why it's a bad question, then it's just frustrating that people ask it, because it implies that we are so lost about, understanding our world and our own selves as well. Especially if the answer to fundamental reality is I am our own self. Or it's the self, it's not necessarily us that's the fundamental self, but the fact that that's the truest thing that we can experience, and it's the piece of information that we must place above all other things. The only thing that you must believe exists, initially at least, more fundamental. You should trust that you exist even before you trust that God exists. The thing is, though, is that once you realize why you must trust that you exist above anything else, then you understand why God must exist. That's what I'm saying. It's like, if you understand why you must, and that you must assume that sentience is the fundamental nature of reality because you are experiencing it firsthand personally, then you understand also why you must assume that it is the fundamental nature of reality, and therefore God. So it's fascinating, the way that some things, some questions are answered, and how we are guided. But there are certain questions that we should know the answer to. Like, if I asked you, what is the truest thing that you know? Like, you should know the answer. And it's the same answer for everybody. I am. If you don't know that, you are so lost. There's no way to maintain information coherence, because you don't have a starting point that's the actual start. It's like trying to count, but never having. If somebody was like, showed you a bunch of numbers, and it was like 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. And you had never heard of 1 or 2 or 3 or 4, obviously, but especially never having heard of 1, and never understanding 1, what the concept of 1 is, what is 1 as a number. You couldn't continue counting, because you wouldn't have the unit that continues throughout all of these numbers of multiplicity. And that's true of information. It's true of numbers because it's true of information. So, and it's true of thinking because it's true of information. For example, if you're standing in a doorway, it is true that you are both inside the room and not inside the room. No, that's not true. If you're standing in the doorway, like, first of all, here's the thing. The circumstances that you set up are not fundamental. They are within space-time, which means they are in a relativistic context. You cannot have fundamental truths in a relativistic context. They're different. So if I ask you, what is a fast car? Well, compared to what? Compared to a golf cart, or compared to a Ferrari? What is a big house? Well, compared to a shack, or compared to, Buckingham Palace? This you can't actually answer what is a big house without, additional context. Same thing is, you can't answer whether or not somebody is in the room or out of the room in that circumstance. Really, they're in the doorway. That's where they are. Or you could say they're in the room if the context is like, a conversation that's happening in the room. It's like, who was in the room when that conversation happened? Also the guy standing in the doorway. Unless he didn't hear it happen, in which case he wasn't in the room. It's like it's like a relativistic perspective. It can't apply to objectivity or fundamentality. I tried to ask myself this too, is like, what is a big house like objectively, fundamentally, not subjectively? The only thing that I could get to was like, if it has more bedrooms than people, or more bathrooms than people, then it's a big house, because it's got more space than needed. But it's not about size. It's about utility, which means it's about goals. Because now this is subspace time. It's the Observerse, I think, but it's the 14-dimensional, space that's created when two 4D minds overlap or nested within each other. In the video that I made, Space-Time in the Observerse, it explains this. My 4D subspace-time isn't length, width, height, and time. It is, from our perspective, it's forwards towards a goal, backwards away from your goal. You're always in your current location, which is your intrinsic constraint, because you can't escape it. You're always in your current location. And then your extrinsic constraint is the fourth one, and it is time, because you're not able to maneuver it. You're just subject to it in how we maneuver through our lives. Like, you can't slow down time because you are late to a meeting. Like, you have to speed up in space. But what you're really doing is you're getting to your goal quicker. And but it's more like, it's even more, I mean, yeah, you're perceiving yourself as getting to your goal quicker, but it's based on goals. And that is what is responsible for the perception of space-time. But that's the context in which you can ask, like, the questions in which there are no paradoxes. You can get to fundamental truth, and there is no paradoxes in that circumstance. In the subspace of reality, which is responsible for the perception of space, or the subspace time, which is responsible for the perception of space-time, which is where doorways are, then there is no paradoxes there, but because it's goal dependent. But there are paradoxes perceived in space-time, but that's not fundamental, and it's not real paradoxes. It's just a perception of a paradox given a limited perspective, if that makes sense. So the doorway analogy, it was a good attempt, but it doesn't make sense either. It's not, it doesn't work. But good, it'd be hard to find one that easily, think of one that does work, because we're not used to thinking in that space. We think about the world in space-time. But you need to think about the space of thinking in order to get to the realm in which there are no paradoxes, or all paradoxes are reconciled, ultimately. But yeah, hope that makes sense. Even Aristotelian logic has to go. I don't know what Aristotelian logic really is. Let's look it up. I mean, I know who it comes from, but honestly, I've never gotten too into this stuff, because I just realized, philosophy is a bunch of it's become, like everything else, so corrupted, and it's just mental masturbation. Not to be crude, but I talked down here before I was talking to a philosophy professor, or at least a PhD, guy who had a PhD in philosophy, or he was a student of getting his PhD in philosophy, something like that. And I listened to him just go on and on and on about how there's 3 Marxes, and I understand kind of my work would imply that it kind of makes sense that he said that, but still, I don't know what he was talking about. But he was talking about Marxism, and somebody was like, "What do you think Marxism is?" And he's like, "First of all, you must understand that there's three Marxes. There's not one Marx. There's three Marxes." And then he just went on and on and on and on, and I was stopped him, and I was like, just in one or two, three, four sentences, even, like, what is philosophy? Like, can you define it? And my philosophy professor in college only took one class, but I was very good at it. But there was one thing that he taught me that was, I think, made him such a great professor. And on the first day, he said, philosophy is the study of perspective. And I was like, brilliant. And it was an ethics of healthcare class, and you're trying to get into this mind of being a patient, being a doctor, being a caregiver, being a family member. And it's the study of perspective. And I agree with that. If philosophy is anything, it's the study of perspective. But I wanted him to hear what he had to say. I thought that this was like the general consensus of the field, but I realized quickly, after talking to more and more philosophy people, that it's not a consensus of the field at all. People say philosophy is the love of wisdom, and I think that is absolutely not what philosophy currently is, even if it once was. But it's better to just call it the study of perspective. We don't say biology is the love of multicellular animals, or creatures or something. It's the study of, cellular and multicellular life. So what is philosophy? It's the study of perspective. But I asked him, what is the philosophy? And he said to me, if I could tell you in one paragraph what philosophy is, then it's not philosophy. And I just hung up the phone. I was like, okay, there is no more value in continuing to engage in this conversation. I was genuinely curious. I wanted to hear it. He sounded like, the ultimate academic in this. He had memorized every book, what is this Aristotelian logic? No, there's not just one Aristotelian logic. There's three. So I've just kind of avoided this stuff. But I understand why people would be like, how could you avoid it? The traditional system of logic expounded by Aristotle and developed in the Middle Ages concerning chiefly with deductive reasoning as expressed in syllogism, which is an instance of a form of reasoning in which a conclusion is drawn, whether validly or not, from two given or assumed propositions, premises, each of which shares a term with the conclusion and shares a common or middle term with not present in the conclusion. For example, all dogs are animals. All animals have 4 legs. Therefore, all dogs have 4 legs. Okay. So it's something that's ends up being accurate by making an inaccurate statement in the middle. It starts with an accurate statement, then it makes an inaccurate statement, then it gets to an accurate statement. But see, this is not... this is my issue with this. Is I don't think that there is such a thing as Aristotelian logic. There's just logic. There's first principles approach to understanding. There is only this. There's one way to think. That's what I learned from this project, is there's only one way to think, which means there's only one logic. There isn't reasoning by analogy and reasoning from first principles. Reasoning by analogy is not reasoning. You understand? This is why I don't get into Aristotelian logic versus, I don't know, some other person's logic. There isn't multiple different forms of logic. There might, be different forms of logic within subjective circumstances of language or something like that. But there isn't objectively different types of logic at all. And so, and I've stated this before, if you're going to, when I first started this project, And I told my dad even, I was like, I think I understand physics on like some next level, like in some crazy ways. And and I really do think that, like, I can see it, the logic of it in my head. Like, it's not like I just feel it all of a sudden. I want to be a physicist. Never wanted to be a physicist. Still don't want to be a physicist. I can't help but be a physicist now, or be a physics theorist. To not try and, I don't know. I don't want to call myself a physicist because that has given assumptions that people make. But I am certainly a physics theorist. I have theories about physics. But I can't help that. It's not like I have any aspirations of doing that. I never did. This was an accident. But I told, my dad, I was like, Dad, I know you're not going to believe me. You shouldn't believe me. But I just have to tell someone, like, I am working on this theory and I think it is, true and like, and valuable, I guess. Profound. I don't know what other words you're going to use. I don't know how profound it is, but it's certainly I don't know, unique and valuable. But and he was like, Tyler, like, you should probably take some physics classes. And I have been listening to thousands of hours of physics lectures at this point. Like, I do believe in learning, but I just knew that, like, I'm trying to understand something that isn't currently understood, so I can't go to school to understand it. Eric Weinstein says this at the very beginning of his geometric unity lecture. He quotes Jim Watson, who was one of the two guys that discovered the double helix, and he said, whenever you are embarking on doing something truly novel, essentially, you are wholly unprepared for that which you are attempting to accomplish. Like, you don't have the credentials to be doing what you're doing. But I said this in my Theories of Everything how-to guide video for the PACE 1 contest. There's no one with credentials that qualifies them as being an expert on theories of everything that exists. No one. So there's no one that we don't have a theory that is the consensus. And it's not even a physics theory. It's a theory that explains physics. So what field is that? It's not even a theory it's not even a mathematical theory. It's a theory that explains mathematics. What field is that? We don't even have the field for this. The closest thing that we have is philosophy, but philosophy has become very much about nonsense and memorization, like the rest of school. So, rant over, hopefully. I get what they're talking about here, but this is just like, there's just logic that's part of this, but I don't think that, like, maybe Aristotle, like, expounded, like, a logical framework. That's fine. I believe that. But, like, why is it Aristotelian logic versus Boolean logic versus modern logic? Different types of logic. Formal logic, symbolic logic, mathematical logic, informal logic. The fact that there's 4 main types of logic listed here, it implies that there is some accuracy to that model, but it's implied by my work with the 4 primary perspectives: inside, outside, separate, and oneness. I didn't know that there was 4 main logic types, but I would still say that those aren't, like, they're different. They're probably different aspects of a greater logic, one logic. The 7 types of reasoning: deductive reasoning, inductive reasoning, analytical reasoning, abductive reasoning, cause and effect reasoning, critical thinking, decompositional reasoning. Like, I understand that this stuff exists, but I'm more interested in the context in which all the stuff, like, fits together. And that does exist, They're not competing. But I will look more into that 4 different types of logic thing, because that's more interesting to me than, like, I don't know. It's like communism versus socialism versus capitalism. It's just these are not a debate. This is not even a debate. Like there is collectivism and there is individuality and or liberty. There's like individual liberty and collectivism, and the goal isn't to try and segment the different types of collectivism and the different types of individual liberty, and then try and have them fight in a debate. Like the goal is to try and find the structure that unifies the two, which marriage. Theory of everyone just meant in context of dialetheism. Yeah, I know. I'm just ripping on an idea or ranting about an idea, but yeah, I mean dialetheism. Like, let's like deconstruct the word a bit, because dialetheism, it sounds like theism, or it's got theism contained with it. So that's dialetheism, which implies that it should be about fundamental reality to me, but I might be wrong. And contradictions exist as emergent perceptions. I understand that. That's true, totally. But not fundamental. Let's see here. Greek meaning twice truth. Theism meaning aletheia meaning truth. And I mean theism derives from the Greek theos, or theoi, meaning God or gods. The term theism, okay, so it sounds, aletheia and theism are very like linked words, obviously. I don't know exactly how, but you can tell aletheia and theist, or theos. God is the truth. Dialetheism is not a system of formal logic. Instead, it is a thesis about truth that influences the construction of formal logic. See, I would say dialetheism would be more accurate term if it said like like two perceptions of truth, not like two truths that are paradoxical, that but I mean, then you could really get into it and you could be like, are two things that are different truly, that are appear to be paradoxical, or that we would call paradoxical, are they truly conflicting? But the thing is that if they're not, then you wouldn't call it a paradox. You would just be like, these two things are true, and you wouldn't be like you wouldn't call it a paradox. I'm getting like deep into this, but I'm gonna think about this after the stream. I need to end it though soon, so like I'm gonna finish the questions in the chat. Sorry if dialetheism is a bit off topic. I have to re-watch the stream to get your reasoning on why the doorway analogy doesn't hold. Don't apologize at all. And first of all, thank you, Marco, for the super chat. Do not apologize. I want you guys to participate in the chat. That's why I get here every week. And that was a great question, because I'm not saying like, I don't know whether or not it's a good question, like as in what I was saying earlier about like what is defining of a good question versus a bad question. But I'm glad you asked it. It like, it's any question is good for the sake of conversation, even, but it's just on the quest of truth. Not every question is a good question, but this one, like any question that you guys ask in the chat, is not bad as long as you're being honest. I really appreciate every question that you guys ask. I struggle to make pre-made videos because I'm bored talking to myself, but I like engaging with you guys. It makes it more real. So I appreciate not just the super chat, but like the question, even more than the super chat. So thank you. Don't apologize at all. It was not off topic either. It was very much on topic. And you guys can ask off topic questions. That's fine too, but it was not off topic. questions and comments sound out of context sometimes because there's typically a delay before you get to them. Oh, I know that. Don't think I don't know that. I definitely know that. But yeah, so if my questions that I reread that people ask don't make sense to anybody just watching it, and if you're not watching the chat, like I go sometimes over an hour without reading the chat. So people might be asking a question or saying something about something I said an hour ago. But with that, I appreciate everybody here. I hope this was interesting, valuable, and these explorations of topics will, I think, continue to get more concise as I start doing them again, in addition to the commentaries. And if you have any ideas or thoughts on the channel and things you would like to see, please comment them in the comments below. If you'd like to join our Discord discussions that we have once a week, it's a Discord call. It's open. We talk about anything. It's at 7 p.m. Pacific time on Thursdays. So there will be one tomorrow. And if you want to join those, then private message me on Instagram and I will send you the link to our Discord. But with that, peace, and thank you to everybody who ever participates in the chat. So I appreciate it.